everyone. This is Nick with Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today, we have a guest on the show, Becko, who's going to help us in our conversations around cost allocation, especially in the healthcare space, and how that translates into all sorts of problems, both from a leadership perspective at the tops of companies, to a founder perspective inside of healthcare startups, to also the technical perspective and what that means in the healthcare and digital space. So, Becko, give us an introduction about yourself, who you are, and what you do and why it's important.
Awesome. Well, good to be here, guys. Nick, Jason, pleasure to be here. I come from healthcare tech background. I spent about last 8 years building software for provider space. So that means doctors and clinicians and big hospital systems. So I've come from that space. I've built clinical decision support products, billing decision support products, did a bit of work on computer vision for radiologists, so CT scans, MRIs, and X-rays, helping radiologists and emergency room physicians make better, more accurate diagnostic decisions using computer vision. And then most recently started my own company in the mental health space. And now I help other founders who are trying to make a meaningful difference in healthcare, do a better job in terms of structuring their cloud architecture so that they can be more efficient with their capital that they raised, and also just be, better operator as a business person. Because one of my core beliefs is architecture is cost optimization. You gotta think about this out of the gate. I know it is very difficult to do, and I've been in that shoes. That's sort of the last thing you want to think about is how do I reduce costs when all you have to think about is go to market and product market fit. I understand, but it's so important to think about this out of the gate. So I help healthcare tech startups grapple with that question. I help advise companies that are in that space. So, and I ran into you guys just because the cost optimization, FinOps, is now the buzzword, and you guys are playing in that space. And I love the podcast. I love the value that you guys are creating through the content. It's been really fantastic for my own growth and understanding FinOps. And I think you guys are doing a tremendous job. And thanks again for inviting me.
Oh, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate that. I think, that why it's important, what you're working on, that resonates so much. It's so true. You raise capital, you want to make the most efficient use of it. And one of the, some of the hardest decisions you have to make early on, there's like this catch-22 you run into where it's like, I want to design for the future and make it efficient and optimal, but I also need to prove this product market fit really, really fast. And so sometimes I have to make some poor short-term decisions that I have to pay off near term. And sometimes they're not thought about long-term, and they become this crazy technical debt that you have to deal with later. But there are certain design decisions that you absolutely want to make up front and sort of intentionally build it right, but also only what you need. Mm-hmm. You can get caught up in this trap as engineers. Me personally, as an engineer, I want to solve kind of all the problems and think about the future and plan it all out. And sometimes you just have to get going. So I love that you're in this space and in addressing those sorts of problems. I guess to jump in, right from the get-go, tell us a little bit about, your experience in the healthcare space. I've got some experience there as well, and how, healthcare and cost allocation, there's this big problem in the healthcare space with certainly spending and thinking about cost of services and so on. Tell us a little bit about your experiences there and kind of how it relates to healthcare startups, the sorts of problems they have to deal with, and so on.
Yeah, I think in a couple of episodes ago, you guys talked about the FinOps journey, starting with the crawl and then walk and then run. One of the first things you guys talked about is cost allocation, right? Before you do anything, you need to shine light into what is actually happening, and that starts with cost allocation. That, to me, is one of the biggest challenges right now facing not just healthcare companies, it's sort of everybody, right? Because we're so used to just spinning up VMs and just working on that VM, and that doesn't really matter if you turn it off or not, right? It didn't really matter until the world of cloud that we live in today. It actually does matter. And I think you'll find that this issue exists in healthcare in many different forms and manifestation. I think obviously in the developer space, when you're developing something, that's something that you need to be aware of. In healthcare space generally isn't so good at that. But also, I think there's a big parallel here in healthcare as a whole. If you ask any provider organization, how much does it cost to render knee surgery? They wouldn't be able to tell you. The variability is massive. And it comes down to many, many different things, not to mention all the insurance, kabuki dance, and all this kind of craziness in healthcare, the incentive alignment, all of that. But there's certainly the cultural aspect of it that exists in healthcare. And as I mentioned earlier, this exists in developer space and software space. And that's something we have to be very mindful of as we're building out these next generation of healthcare companies, is how do we make sure that we can allocate costs appropriately so that we know how much it actually costs. So something that I'm really keen on driving that cost transparency and cost allocation. And I'd say one of the things that it's one of those questions that is so intertwined with the business. And let me just speak directly to the business audience that might be interested in this. I think it's so important to just roll up your sleeves and work with the engineers to figure out what is the tagging strategy going to look like. What is the cost allocation going to actually look like? I think it's so important to do that. It's not something that you lob over to the developers and say, go figure this out. It doesn't work that way because it's so intertwined. So yeah.
They also don't speak the same language.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is one of the things FinOps deals with well also is, come up with a common set of language. If you're not meeting with them, it's going to be really difficult to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's a lot of those early decisions as well that you're touching on, like that getting your allocation correctly in a startup, where your business leaders, your product leaders who have the vision for how you're going to impact the healthcare space is definitely a different way of thinking about what you're delivering than what the engineers are thinking about, because they're thinking about the direct kind of implementation right at the very detailed level. And being able to communicate how you're going to actually allocate those very technical things helps you actually get to your unit economics, right? So you have to allocate first. But unit economics are so critically important to early stage because they help you decide how to price the product.
Oh yeah.
And if you're, if you don't understand your technology costs every time you deploy a customer, whatever your unit is, that can get really scary really fast as you're starting to move out of your design partners and into your scale, your first
absolutely
attainment.
I think I'll just mention one of the things that I have noticed is people talk about, when you go out raise funding as a startup, you have to present, CAC to LTV metrics, right? The classic lifetime value to the cost of customer acquisition cost. Okay, so you want to present that metric, and depending on that metric and depending on the growth rate of your whatever you're providing, that can dictate what is the price of your company. That can be totally dictated by that. So if you don't have that right, it not only affects the financial operational side of your business on a just operational basis, it also puts your financial jeopardy. It also puts risk in terms of raising further capital to sustain the growth. So making sure that you have cost optimization and cost allocation right is super, super important. Yeah.
100% agree with that. I mean, yeah, it affects valuation. So it affects every raise, every equity event. And especially when you're in a downturn. I mean, macroeconomic conditions are not great right now, and you want to be the darling. So you want to know and understand those numbers and show that you know them, because in every pitch I've ever been in, it's guesses of guesses, right? Because you haven't actually yet developed the product, and you don't. you haven't necessarily focused on the unit economics and selling. And so when you are at that stage where you can understand it and you can present it as a factual findings, that is so much more powerful in an environment like this where you're competing for the little bit of supply of cash that's available.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. I want to go back to the parallel that you drew, because I think this is a really powerful parallel. When I've been in healthcare a lot in my career, and you drew two links that resonate with me entirely. And let's address the first one, culture, because I think having been in the healthcare space, both in healthcare tech startups, as well as being in the actual provider space, which are two totally different types of culture and two totally different ways of looking at technology, that does drive a lot of how they think about technology in the healthcare space. And I think that's really important because it sort of parallels how cloud or technology is viewed inside of most organizations. My experience is tech startups. It is, especially healthcare tech, technology is important, right? It is part of critical path. It's part of how you deliver your products. You do think a lot of times on the front edge. So they're thinking in terms of AI and ML and, how to deal with data, how to deal with delivering a product quickly in the market. It's responsive, that the healthcare space wants to use, knows how to use. But when you're on the provider side, actually, they have a totally different relationship with technology. A lot of times they do not want to deal with the front end of technology. It's too expensive. Their margins are too small. They don't want to go through and retrain an entire healthcare staff, whether it's their nursing staff or their doctors, et cetera. And they're far more focused on direct patient impacting technology, MRI, et cetera, right? And so they have a completely different view of cloud and technology. What would you say to those sorts of organizations, or to either organization, that they need to be thinking about, or what's sort of the thing they're missing?
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to kind of think about the provider space, like you said, I think the rise of the value-based paradigm, where you're now under contract in the value-based contract. You're now under value-based contract, meaning that you have to report out quality metrics if you want to get paid the amount that you were promised, because you're now having to, carry that risk, because it's no longer, I love this phrase, it's a paradigm shift from volume to value. Meaning prior to this change, it was all about volume. How many patients can you get in through your ED and your ICUs? It's about churn. It's about just in and out, in and out. That obviously has perverse incentive. With the value base, it's not perfect, but the idea is that you get a check and then that's all you get. You want to make sure you take care of this patient with that amount of money. That's all you're going to get. And you have to, and with that comes a lot of responsibility around quality. You want to make sure the quality is good. You want to make sure that you can report on that. And there are clauses in the value-based contract that dictate that to be the case. There are all sorts of nuances there that we don't have to go into, but I think it's going to lead providers to actually start allocating costs in a more rational, in a more kind of clear way. Huge challenge. I mean, it's not going to get done anytime soon. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I think, and perhaps one of the, if you look at cost allocation for providers, perhaps the least of their worry is technology, because there's so many other variables at play. But for a tech-enabled services provider organizations, I think it's one of those things that you can actually stand on top of to differentiate yourself from traditional providers, if you can actually do that. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting opportunities from startups standpoint to be able to help them with cost allocation and help them, eventually down the cost optimization path. But that's one area that I see potential area to play for startups that are looking to get into the healthcare space.
Yeah, it's I've had interesting experiences inside the provider space, and this has been some time has gone by. But a sneak peek behind that curtain of my direct experience is that in providing healthcare, they allocate in their budget. There's a certain number of certain types of tests that they are budgeted for per day, and so there is a number of those that they can easily go do. But as they start to approach the quota for the day, well, then you start getting into sign-offs and approvals and so on, because you're actually you're kind of going over budget, and you can have this ebb and flow in ED where you may have a day where it's a fairly normal flow, but then tomorrow suddenly you're overwhelmed. The waiting room's full, people are waiting outside. It's whatever, next round of COVID has hit, and or it's a full moon or whatever it is, but it's suddenly overrun, and it's hard. I've been in that experience where it can be next to impossible to get a bed for someone who's truly sick because of how they have to think about cost allocation and their metrics and what they're delivering and so on. You mentioned kind of perverse incentives. Like, it is, we're always thinking about incentives, and inside the healthcare space, it's really hard to think about what are the proper incentives and how do we get the best, highest value of care to the folks who need it, even when it's going to be a high volume day. Those are hard. Those are really hard topics.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of interesting nuances that we can go into.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of issues here. I think cloud, FinOps, and being able to allocate costs could be a nice first step.
I think so too. Well, I think you could probably take that parallel and relate it back to sort of cloud FinOps, and optimization in general for any organization. You're delivering a product to market, and you're going to have days where you're, that variable spending model, it's going to kind of hit where you think it's supposed to hit, and then you're going to have these days where it goes completely outside of the bounds. In trying to understand why, without a framework in place, without having a FinOps discipline internally, or without thinking about allocation and how you look at budget, that can be a shock if you can't do the forensics. It can be, FinOps can be super powerful when you can do the forensics, when you understand your reporting, when you can go look at, oh, wait a minute, this was a high volume day. Maybe it was a certain time of the month for a billing type platform, and boom, everybody ran their end of month transactions. And now I can see that, oh, okay, this is now a pattern I need to account for in my cost model for my product. Those, without the discipline to be able to go do that, it can get really costly to try and figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I work with a few clients right now on cost optimization. Having people talk about cost optimization. I'm going to do a quick plug on this. Guys do you guys know Duckbill Group?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guys at Duckbill Group, Corey and Michael. I spoke to Michael the other day, and one of the things they say all the time is, the solution architecture is cloud optimization. You can do cloud optimization to a degree by some of these, some of the tools around this, being able to buy reserve instances here and there. Great, that's all fantastic, but you have to look at it from a more comprehensive approach from an engineering standpoint. How do you actually architect this? I love that. I love that framing, and I would say that framing exists also from an engineering standpoint, like we talked about, but also from a business standpoint, because you have to look at this holistically. And I think it takes a special kind of leader to be able to stitch all those things together: the business angle, the technical angle, and then also the cost optimization and the FinOps, and how the organization is going to evolve from those different vantage points. I think it's so important. Yeah,
I think that
I agree with you.
Yeah,
go ahead, Jason.
The providers. Those savings instruments, commitment discounts, committed use discounts, right, for savings plans, reserved. Those were developed to keep people using their most profitable services. I mean, that's what they were done. That's why they did it. They don't want, I think it's still like 60 plus, almost 70% of their revenue comes from those legacy compute services. And that revenue would dramatically drop if you took that same workload and re-architected it in a cost optimized way. So, leveraging whatever, serverless or, functions or contain, whatever the case may be, right? And so, yeah, they're absolutely right. I mean, it starts with the architecture, and if you can't do that, then you have savings instruments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things that I think has helped me is to think about the true definition of cloud native. I think is something that I didn't really understand until I got into some of this FinOps language. True cloud native, man, it's something very different than just spinning up EC2s.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's also something very different than just using Kubernetes, right? So
correct.
It's a way of thinking, it's a way of doing that is different.
Yes, definitely.
It's a mind shift. It's not technology. It's a complete shift in how you've been doing things, not just from a technological perspective, but culturally and process and all those things. And it does take a very dedicated and organization, right? Leader organization to accomplish that. But once you do, the benefits aren't just from a cost optimization perspective, right? The
Definitely.
benefits, whatever you're providing to your customers, you're going to see an increase in functionality, speed, time to market. You can name all of the things that you can that are the benefits from being cloud native.
Yeah, definitely. I like that point, Jason, because oftentimes, I'm not sure about you guys, and I think this probably applies to you, but when you start the conversation with a client about cost optimization, the usual pitch for me is, let me help you shave 30% of your cost, enable your cost, so that you can extend your runway. Right now, that message resonates with a lot of people. Once you get going, it quickly turns into a broader discussion around architecture and broader discussion about the business and the business model, the cost structure of the entire organization. And that has been the escalatory path of the scope creep, as you say. But it's I think that speaks to the power of this angle of cost optimization, because it resonates with people today, but it'll pay so much dividend if you really kind of think about it from this cost optimization standpoint. That's going to have ripple effects all the way through the business. Yeah,
I absolutely agree, and I like where this conversation has gone. Solution architecture is absolutely optimization. That's the goal. And what I think sometimes folks forget, and every architect knows this, but what folks forget is that architecture is like a living thing, and it changes, it adapts, it has to move with the business. And so that's why it's so critical that especially your top level engineering staff, but all your engineering staff, it's important, but your top level engineering staff really understands the business and understands the economics of the business, because that's where you're going.